Hello.
Good evening.
It's yeah, it's the evening before we're about 2 hours before the time that we normally air the show and recording the show. So our apologies that we're going to be slightly late, but nonetheless, welcome to the show. As you can see from the graphic, this is Greg and Jeff give the hi-hat motherfuckers.
I would clap, but I'm holding the phone, so it's all good.
Well,
Very very
I was just
snazzy
using the graphic. This right here is a huge effect right here.
we
So,
we spent we literally spent tens of dollars on this.
easily, if that, yeah,
Uh,
if that. So, for all of you watching, you can close your jaw. We've got graphics for this show. That's all I'm saying. Greg, what have you got going on, man?
uh, Nothing much. Hey Jeff, I hate to. It looks like from your side, it looks like I'm only seeing half of you. Am I only going to get
I
half the effort?
understand that. It's interesting that you said that because we spoke about that right before we went on the air, but
Oh,
we're going to work it out in editing.
okay.
We've
You'll see the full work.
yeah.
You'll see the
Jeff in
full
all his glory.
extent of
Mhm.
But no,
Yep.
but
And
no,
about
I am.
halfway through the show, I'm gonna stand up and pull my pants down, and then you'll really get to see everything.
once you see that.
I change
Yeah.
it to Jeff and Greg give
Hmm.
the full Monty or something like that.
Yeah. There you go. I hear objections in the background.
Yeah,
Oh no.
my wife Jan saying, "Please God, no,
Oh,
no."
Jeff and
Uh,
Greg give the full moon. Jeff and Greg give the crescent.
Jeff and Greg give the fruit
I
bowl.
don't even know what that would entail. Ha!
What's it?
All right, jocular humor
Well, Hunter's,
aside,
yeah, I know. We're just kind of rambling here, but I think it's
uh,
cool and all. But like, what's on the agenda for tonight, Greg? What are we
I,
talking about?
I think we're going to be talking about in the world of sports the seismic shift that has gone on really in the last 3 years, but really the epicenter has come in the last week or so, and that is,
Mm-hmm.
the it has come to pass that the almighty dollar has won. You have college football basically looks like a big Chinese fire drill right now. Everybody is scrambling.
Yeah.
The Pac-10 is no more. Aside, I mean, everybody probably.
And yeah, that's
If you,
really,
oh
keep
no,
going, buddy.
no, I was just going to say it's like everybody's probably already, it's been all over the news, and if you follow sports any whatsoever in college football, essentially the last remnants of the Pac-12 have jumped ship. You had
Mm-hmm.
Washington and Oregon
It's
moving
the
to the Big
Pac
Ten. You
Four
had
now.
Arizona and Arizona State and Utah going to the Big 12, which makes the Pac-12 now down to just 4 teams. And, it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
much the buzzards are circling over the remaining, was it Cal, Oregon State, Washington State, and Stanford. So
Mm-hmm.
um, we're going
Well,
to be
nobody
talking a
wants
little bit about
Washington.
it.
Well, we'll get into that. I don't want to start off the show talking about Oregon and Washington State, or Oregon State and Washington State, rather. But I mean, it's something that needs to be talked about because I mean, at some point it's going to have to happen. But I mean, I think that's like biggest point of all of this right now. I mean, we've always talked about college sports, about the Power Five, at least over the last 2 decades, and now I mean, there is no more Power Five. There's a Power
There isn't.
Four.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, what does that mean? I mean, I don't even know where to start. I think like I just want to get. I think a good place to start from all this is something that has happened, and I think should have happened a long time ago. Where I mean, all these millions of dollars are like funneling into these schools, and you can only do so much with facilities to make it world class. I mean, these colleges have better facilities than some pro teams have. I mean, it's just ridiculous. I mean, all this money is just funneling into those facilities and those things. But now we have the NIL, or um, name, image, and likeness, for those that don't know what that means, which basically means that these college kids can actually get paid for the millions of dollars that the colleges are making on their names and their likenesses. And so they can actually profit in it on themselves. They can sell their jerseys, they can do commercial deals or whatever, and like give themselves a stipend or whatever. I mean, obviously the better kids are going to get more money than the ones that are like, 2-star recruits that just got a scholarship barely. But nonetheless, it all works out. And like the money's redistributed where it should be, because football is a dangerous ass sport, and every time you step on the field and run a play, it could be the last play you ever play. So anytime anybody can ever make anything in football at any level that's substantial, I think is great, because they're putting their life and their physical nature, um, and for the rest of their lives on the line every play. And anything anybody makes in football, I think they deserve it.
Oh,
That's all
absolutely.
I got to say about that. I
No,
just
no,
want to
no,
see what you
you're
think
absolutely
about
right.
it.
And this whole NIL thing, kind of, and we may have touched on this in the earlier episode. The ball kind of got rolling on that at Northwestern, where there was the football team actually tried to unionize and saying that, hey,
Hmm.
the university is profiting off of our name, image, and likeness, and making all this money, and all we're getting, yes, it's great to get a free education, but it's so unbalanced. The compensation that they were, that was their argument, and to be, sure enough, a couple of years ago, it came to pass that finally, made it legal to essentially what was in the shadows for decades. Players getting paid for, and
Yeah, that's the
also
key
not,
word. Made it legal.
yes, and not lost in all this is like, not only do you have the name, image, and likeness for your star players at these these powerhouse universities, but I also believe that the transfer portal also played a part, because all right, now that you have that with the NIL, all right, if you're a 5-star recruit going to, what's the matter you, and you're not happy there, and you're not making the money that you think you're going to be, or getting the exposure that you want, you can get a almost like a get out of jail free. You can actually transfer through the portal to another university, and you wouldn't have to sit out a year like in the past. And so you
Yeah.
can just hop to another university, and sign NIL deals there.
Well, the funny that you mentioned that, and I like that too, not sitting out a year, because I mean, you've only got like 5 years of eligibility and to like make a mark and do something with your athletic career. And I mean, if you're like at Alabama and you're like a 5-star recruit and you're buried in the depth chart, like at cornerback, and you're like third or fourth string, I mean, that you can transfer to like maybe not an equivalent of Alabama, but you could transfer to somebody like maybe the ACC, like maybe Pittsburgh or something.
Yeah.
Not to just pick one of my schools, and you're going to be a starter on that team.
Right.
As a junior, as opposed to third string or fourth string. And I mean, you got to be on the field in order to be able to like have a chance to make it to the next level. And I mean, Alabama is full of people that have the athletic ability to do it, but not everybody makes the field. So I think
Mm-hmm.
it's, that more than anything is going to like create a heck of a lot more parity in college football. I think both like State and Carolina, if we're talking about it, is really going to like benefit from the transfer this year because they both teams really filled up a lot of holes on their teams with the transfer this year. I mean, guys, I mean, normally you would have to like, draft them out of high school or like sign them out of high school and develop them for a year or two. And now, you know, you have a hole somewhere. You don't, necessarily fill it with a like a five guy that you can plug and place right away. Take a guy from LSU that's like, riding on the bench somewhere, but I mean, he's got plenty of talent. I mean, the story's going on. I just think it's great for the kids. It's great for college football in general, that these kids can go where they can play. And so what this means is all the best players are going to be on the field, and that's it. Everybody's going to be able to put out the best product possible. But the only one thing I will say about that is like when kids like transfer one time and then second time, third time, and the NCAA is starting to crack down a little bit academically. Um, because there's a kid right now that like is doing a second transfer to UNC Chapel Hill in basketball, and they're saying that his like educational transcripts aren't in order, and so they didn't grant him the transfer yet. So, or he's not going to be eligible right away.
Did you see what
And
he
some people have already said it's like
here?
the college game is turning more and more into the NFL.
Business.
It's a business,
Yeah.
and quite frankly, these and coaches have said this. It's like free agents now. There is no, and it's and what you were alluding, you were laying out earlier. It has changed the way coaches and recruiters. It's changed the recruiting landscape and how you recruit. And you're absolutely right. When you're a coach, or maybe you're a first year coach, you don't have to beat the trail as much to go out and scout. You can just say, okay, well, we need a linebacker. All right, well, let's look, instead of going to, like high schools or maybe small colleges and try to recruit there, they just like, okay, well, let's look at these universities and let's see who's unhappy there. Hey, we like this guy. He's a second stringer, but he can start for us. We're going to,
Mhm.
instead of beating the trail, we're just going to go, hey, if you come play with us,
Plug and play.
then you plug and play. And, if you're good enough, then you make your money with the NIL. And, everybody, at least on the surface, everybody benefits. But,
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
but
Well,
the,
well, look, I know we're kind of like somewhat limited on our time tonight, and this is probably a subject that we're gonna like to leave to be like discussed later because things change, and it's like interest is in crap. Interest is interesting as crap to both of us. So we'll probably keep talking, and it changes daily. But I think probably Hunter, if you can help us with the slide, I think the best place to start is because it's the thing that's most important to us is the Atlantic Coast Conference. We can take a look at where we are now with the teams and what are we going to do to survive. There's the American Athletic Conference. Can you see that?
I cannot.
Yay, nay.
Negative.
I
But referring back to the ACC and what all this realignment, especially lately in the
hmm
last week or two, the ACC is locked in. All the schools in the conference have signed essentially a contract saying that they're locked in to the conference until the TV deal runs out in, like, I want to say it was like 2036. I mean, it's a
Yeah,
good
it's like
10
for the
years
next
from now.
12 years. Yeah.
Yeah,
2037, I think, is what it is. Or
and so
6 or 7. One of the,
and so all the teams that are in the ACC right now are locked in, and the exit fees, I think, run like $120 million. If you wanted to leave the conference, it would cost the school that much, and that's just mind blowing. And so they've locked all the conference teams in, and so they're kind of handcuffed at the moment. But then here in the last week or so, I mean, Florida State, their president has openly said, "Hey, you know what? This the way we're getting revenue and the way we make our revenue from this deal, it's it's not fair, you know." And so he's kind of
Yeah.
thrown down the gauntlet and said that they would explore ways to leave the conference if it doesn't, if things don't improve or the revenue is not more fair. And I did hear a report that the Florida State is actually like looking into, I want to say like J.P. Morgan to try to get the financial house in order so that if they do pull the trigger on that, they would be able to afford to. And quite frankly, looking and just hearing and reading a little bit and kind of getting a feel of what all these schools are doing, especially with um, um, the the going away of the Pac-12. Um, yeah, the ACC teams are locked in now, but I think the clock is ticking. I mean, if you're Florida
Yeah.
State and if you're Clemson right now, you're kind of looking. I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, the ACC is a nice conference, but really, if you're talking football, there's only two teams,
And that's
and
the money. I
there
mean,
was
that's the
only
thing. We're
one
not
team
talking
for the
about
longest
any
time.
other sport.
I mean, if you really wanted to say for the longest time, in the last 10 years, there's only been one team from the ACC that even sniffs the playoffs, if the college playoffs, and that's Clemson. Clemson has been carrying the ACC on its back for like the last 5, 10
For the
years or
last
so.
decade.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and if I'm Clemson, I mean, Clemson hasn't really come out and said anything, but if I'm Clemson right now, I'm looking, I'm kind of looking at ways to get out of this as well because I mean, once you get all these conferences, these mega conferences in, Clemson, they're going to have to do so much more to make it to the play. Now I know the playoffs has expanded, but even to get into that like top 12, I mean, you look at the conference strength wise in the ACC in football, and you compare it to the SEC, or you compare it to the Big Ten, and even now you compare it to maybe the Big 12, and you're looking at how does Clemson get in? Yeah, they may be undefeated, but yeah, they won against Virginia Tech and Boston College and Duke, and that just doesn't sound good, And now, granted,
Hmm.
in time, like we were talking about earlier, with the NIL and the transfer portals, the parity will come, will probably come to the ACC, and the ACC will rise and be at that level. But in the meantime, I, if I'm Clemson right now, if I'm Florida State right now, I am looking hard at the SEC and saying, you know, you got room for two more. Um, I mean, even Miami. I mean, if University of Miami ever got back to being relevant in college football, they could be, they could be asked down as well. I think right now,
Yeah.
I think the ACC is on borrowed time. I think the clock is ticking, um, and I think
Well,
eventually,
let's talk about like what let's talk about it because I should have looked it up before we started talking about it tonight. But what we're talking about here right now is that the SEC and the Big Ten have a shit ton of money that's allotted to them from their TV deals that the
hmm
other conferences don't have. The other two now Power Five, it's Power Four conferences now because Pac-12 is gone. It's no small amount of money that ACC teams get. I mean, they get like with the current ESPN the contract, ACC network contract, they get just over 40 million a year per team. So, like, what does the SEC teams get, and what do like um, Big Ten teams get
well,
per year from their contract?
well, the thing, I think
You
the
know?
figure for the figure for the ACC teams is more along the lines of 30 mil, and I think the biggest grumbling is that the Big Ten and the SEC, there's from what I've been
For
reading
like
and hearing, there's
twice,
like
right?
there's a $20 million gap. It's like I mean the
Yeah.
SEC and the Big Ten get like 50 million per school, and then when we talk about 30 million or 50
Mm-hmm.
million, each school gets that from the TV deal. And the ACC,
Mm-hmm.
even though they signed a long-term contract with ESPN, they're only getting 30 mil. And quite frankly, ESPN is hurting for money right now. I mean, they
Mm-hmm.
actually, I was listening and I stumbled across something that maybe a couple of years ago, ESPN actually had an offer on the table to the Pac-12 for like 30, for the $30 million for the TV rights, and the Pac-12 turned it down. And then the clock, they just let the Pac-12 just let it lapse. They let their TV deal lapse, and then at the last minute, they thought they had maybe something with Apple, but and this is kind of the catalyst that had five teams leave in the span of a week. Uh, the presidents were like, okay, well, there's two things wrong with it. The money offered from Apple was like in the range of 25 million per school, and
Mm-hmm.
they thought they deserved the 50 million along with some of the other Power Five conferences. And so not only that, but it was streaming based, which means
Yeah. It
you would
wasn't
have to
broadcast.
sign
Yeah.
up, right? And there was really, I mean, they had projections, but they didn't have anything guaranteed. Whereas with if you sign a deal with the Big Ten network or the SEC network and ESPN, that's locked in. You're going to get this, and because it was streaming based and uh, subscription based, there's no. I mean, yeah, they could, if the interest is there, they could make 40, 50 million. But if it's not, then it could be less than the 25 million than that they were projected to get. And but for those reasons, that's why pretty much Washington and Oregon and Utah, Arizona State, they said screw this. It's like, and on top of that, they didn't have to pay a penalty to leave the Pac-12 because the TV
Yeah.
deal had expired. There was no
Mm-hmm.
penalty for them to do so. So if they were going to leave, this was the time to do it, and they all said, "We're done."
Well, I mean, the ACC, I mean, the Pac-12, I mean, you can say all you want to about the leadership, but that guy was just in a closet or something somewhere if we're not seeing the
Yeah.
writing on the wall there. But
Mhm.
ACC hadn't had much better leadership between Swafford and now the idiot that's got those ties to Northwestern himself. But I'm not even going to get into that. But I mean, the thing of it is like, this year we're going to play college football. I mean, all these teams are going to bring millions and millions of dollars in, and it ain't like none of these schools are like hurting. You know what I mean? It's just like what you have compared to somebody else, and so like from this year, from what the Big Ten makes per school versus what the ACC makes per school, it's not really that big of a deal. For 1 year. I mean, it's not that much of a discrepancy. But if you look at it over the course of a decade or the next 10, 12 years, however long the ACC network's going, I mean, you're talking about like Big Ten schools and SEC schools making, bringing in 150 more million over that course of time than what ACC teams bring in. I mean, when you talk about what you can put into recruiting, facilities, everything else in the world, I mean, that puts you at a huge disadvantage. 1 year, no big a deal over the course of a long period of time. That's what makes it a big deal. So, what does that mean on the field? Does that mean that the ACC can't compete anymore over the long term? Possibly. I mean, I
Yeah,
don't know.
think so.
I mean, even where we are right now in college football, there's always teams coming from like outside of the Power Five or whatever that's in the conversation for a national championship or at least the playoffs every year. So I don't think that it's like that big a deal. I mean, it certainly puts you at a disadvantage. There's no doubt about it. But I think the right thing right now, I mean, you've got, I mean, literally the way the conferences line up. I mean, in your opinion, in your mind, I mean, what do you think is a more solid conference? Do you think it's the Big 12 or the ACC?
right now.
Well, here's the Big 12. Yeah, right now. I mean, as they stand right now, I mean, who do you think is more? Because the Big 12 seems pretty solid, and there's a lot of good
Yeah,
teams
I
in
mean,
there. Um,
and on
but do you
top,
think that ACC is more unstable ground? Because in my opinion, the only thing right now going on with the ACC that's got me concerned is how much of a loudmouth that Florida State is being. Because, we can all say like, look, we know we're in a pickle, but together we're going to figure out how to make it better. But with FSU out here running their mouth, it's like whatever. And I mean, I know FSU is FSU. I know in football it's a national brand. They have national titles and everything. But I mean, it's kind of like the same thing that's been going on with Tennessee. It's like, what have you done for me lately? You know what I mean? I know you used to be a national contender, but you haven't nationally contended for like 10, 12 years now. In fact, you've almost been a joke over the course of that time. You know what I
right.
mean? And it's like before you can like take this stance of like, you've at least got to show some semblance that you can get back to that level because you're not FSU from 2005. You're FSU from 2023. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of people, FSU fans, longtime fans. I mean, there's like, the young people that are FSU fans, all they've ever known is FSU sucks in football.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? And they're a
And,
middling team in the ACC. I mean, if you were like started being an FSU fan, started following when you were like 13 years old and you're 25 now, all you know and then has been the joke. You know what I mean? And that's a big deal. That's a long period of time. And I know that everybody's up on them this year and everything, but they've been up on them in the past, just like they have Miami, saying Miami's back. So, you know what I say? Until you're like prove on the field that like you're that team, then keep your mouth shut and let's figure out how to make the conference better. You know
and
what I mean? I mean, just shut your mouth. I mean, I don't think, I'll tell you the truth, and I'm gonna tell it. It's like nobody wants you FSU. There's one team in the ACC that everybody would bend over backwards that have, and it's not FSU and it's not Clemson. And it hurts me to say it, but I know the team that everybody wants, and you know the team that everybody wants. It's UNC.
because you get possibly because you get a whole package there. You get a halfway decent football team, a middle of the
Yeah.
conference
Well, one
football
that's
team.
capable. It's a
No, they're not
national
getting
brand.
no.
It's a national brand. Yes, it is. I mean,
Well, I
the
mean, it's a
school
national
is
brand,
from
yes,
Michael
I mean,
Jordan.
from money standpoint, but you know,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but that's the it's like even
Um, uh,
in
it enters the Big Ten into the North Carolina market. It enters the Southeastern Conference into the Big Ten market. I personally think that like if somehow the Big Ten can get UNC, that would be like a match made in heaven. I mean, as far as like what we're leading to now, I'm not saying that's what I want to happen because if UNC leaves ACC, I mean that's the end of the conference. I mean, I'm not. I'm just
yeah,
saying
I
the
mean
one good
that's
thing
that's
that
true.
like that doesn't concern me now is because the UNC Board of Governors already met and said that what UNC um, cannot leave the ACC and leave NC State in the debunked ACC. So,
Right.
if State goes to the Big 12 or the SEC and UNC goes to the Big 10, that's fine. But they're not going to let UNC leave State into what the remnants of the ACC is basically, or vice versa. I mean, if I'm being fair about it, I mean, if State got an invite to the Big 12 and they went, they were not going to let State go unless Carolina's got someplace to go else, whether it's the same conference or whatever. So, as far as the ACC goes, I think State and Carolina are in the best spot if they just stick together like they doing. I mean, UVA and Virginia Tech has a lot of clout. They're doing the exact same thing. I think I think UVA and Virginia Tech and State and Carolina as a pair have more of a pull than Florida State and Clemson do. I just really do. I mean, when you look at the grand scheme of things, I just do. I don't know how you feel about that.
I agree with some of it. However, I think UNC, if they were to pull state with them, I think the UNC would probably be a better fit, financially and competition wise in the SEC. Because if you think about it, UNC could be a decent middle of the road football team in the SEC, as well as state.
Yeah.
And on top of that,
What would you prefer?
who wouldn't want to see Kentucky UNC twice a year in basketball? I mean, really, and I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
even though,
Tell me about it.
I mean, that's why I don't, I foresee, I think if UNC and NC State were to come out together, leave the ACC, I think they would be a better fit in the SEC as opposed to the Big Ten. Now, granted,
I
no,
don't know. I think like here's the thing. I think I know how you feel about that, but I think that like Carolina and State both in football would have a better chance competing, like actually competing in football in the Big Ten, because there's not as
I
many
agree.
powerhouses there.
I
And then
agree.
from a basketball standpoint, I think that they could actually elevate the conference. You know what I mean? To a certain degree.
I Yes, and I agree. Um, I, I I I do.
Well,
I agree
certainly
with
in the
that.
SEC they could do that, but what do they bring in back in football? I think it would just be drowned it out. I mean, the SEC is so drowned it out right now. I mean, there's going to be when we get honestly about 5 years down the road, you're going to see the SEC standings with the nil now, with the transfer rules now. It's every year the like East and West is going to be like 5-2 and 4-3 for the like division champions. There's going to be a lot of parity in the SEC. There are so many good schools. I mean, I just don't know. I mean, it's ridiculous now the way they fire coaches and like, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine the pressure it is on the kids playing and everything in the SEC with so many good schools paired against each other. I mean, it's so easy. I mean, what is a team like Missouri going to do now? I mean, I know they get a lot of money, but they're just buried. Vanderbilt. I mean, Jesus Christ. I'm sure they don't mind the money they're getting either, but
No,
what are they ever going to do in anything?
exactly, and that's Missouri. Missouri thanks its lucky stars that you know the last time the SEC before the Texas Oklahoma thing, they plucked
Uh-huh.
Texas A&M and Missouri from the Big 12. Missouri's got to be thanking its lucky stars. It's even in a major conference right now. Um,
Yeah.
I,
And Nebraska getting out of the Big 12 into the Big 10. I think about that. They just quietly did that about 10 years ago. And they're just like,
Mhm.
right
and,
now. You know what I mean? But
and even more funny than that, it was like Colorado left the Big 12 to go to the Pac-10 for about 10 years, and then
hmm
they saw and they jumped back to the Big 12 even before this whole fiasco started. So they kind of saw the writing on the wall as well. And to touch on a point about Florida State's being a loudmouth, their president, yeah, he kind of put his foot in his mouth, but the thing about it is like he's thinking what UCLA and USC, they were at least able to keep quiet about it because that crew,
hmm
when they jumped to the Big Ten, there was really no warning whatsoever, and that just blindsided the chancellors and the president of the Big 12. And they were like, "Oh my God, you know, these two huge marquee schools that have national um, recognition and brand, they just left. The flagships essentially just left us." And I, God, the whoever's the head of the
I think
Pac-12,
Florida
I'm
State
surprised he still
situation.
has a job today because he
Yeah, I
left.
think Florida.
Oh, go ahead. I was going to
No, I
say
was
the
just
Pac.
saying, I think Florida State's situation. in all this, is the fact that the ACC has been so inept in their dealings of like trying to keep pace with everybody else, and the like their bite or their bark rather is a lot bigger than their actual bite. They know they can't do anything, but they're frustrated as shit, just like everybody else in the ACC is, and is like, we're going to raise the shit until you do something. Otherwise we're going to continuously say we don't like where things are now. And that's all you can do because there's opportunities and things that ACC can do. So look, like I know we're kind of limited tonight with our time and all, and we know this is something that we're going to have to continue to talk, and we'll do like a part two or even part three if we have to. But let's focus for like the last 10 minutes or so on like what can the ACC do to save themselves right now. And I mean, I think like you can say it and we can argue it, and I don't think it's ever going to be happen. The best thing that the ACC can do right now is get the Notre Dame in as a full time
That's it.
football.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
they're full time and everything else. But I mean, how are you going to convince them? I mean, they're an independent in football. They've got
they've
a
got the
thing where
NBC
they
TV
play
deal,
a contract of 4 ACC teams a year, and then they get their traditional rivalries and do their independent thing and all that shit. But they're not full time in football, so they're not in the conference championship or anything like that. So,
and
um,
to interject, the main reason
and
why
they have their
NBC
and
does. Oh, go ahead. I was just going to I didn't mean to interrupt. I was going to interject. The main reason why Notre Dame is an independent in football right now is because of NBC money. If it wasn't for the NBC
yeah,
money, they would have joined the Big Ten a long time ago.
oh yeah. Well, I think the ACC is a comfortable place for them because they see where like kind of college sports are going and like the slip away from academics. And Notre Dame prides themselves from being an academic institution, and but you know what I mean? So they're like those traditional rivalries, like the real like college field rivalries, and they can keep the traditional ones they have with USC and some of the Big Ten schools, and play 4 teams in the ACC, which on all those are going to be they got a good chance to win all of them. But I mean, what do you go from there? I mean, there's no benefit if they join the ACC. I mean, what do you do? Like, I'm going to keep our money, but we're not going to share it with you. I mean, so I mean, there's no benefit for Notre Dame to do it, and Notre Dame, even in the background, is pushing for the ACC to add, from the defunct Pac-10 now, Stanford and shoot, Cal, which
Yeah.
are great, world-renowned universities academically.
No. Well,
But
academically, yes.
I mean, what do you
Academically,
do?
yes. But they
Yeah,
don't bring the dollars in.
I mean, but neither one. They don't bring the eyes. They don't bring the dollars. I
Nope.
mean, it's a great idea. They're great schools, and they would fit in perfect with the conference. But I mean, you're average. You're taking in 2 schools on the West Coast where you know what do you do? I
Well,
mean, I mean, everybody in ACC is on the East Coast, and they're going to have to travel 4 times a year to the East Coast to play games, and then like
mhm.
the ACC schools in the middle of the season is going to have to fly out to the West Coast to play some games. I mean, I don't know. I mean, is it going to bring? I mean, who's going to want to see the featured game on Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock? Wake Forest and Cal. I mean, who wants to watch that shit? I mean, you
Nobody.
know what I'm saying?
Nobody.
Nobody. But I
And
mean, there are some cool things I mean, like Clemson, playing Stanford and like SoFi Stadium. That's something. But I mean, where's the dollars at? I don't know. I don't
it,
know.
it's
I
not
don't know.
there.
I think the best thing for the ACC is to keep what they've got and keep their options open, and just keep pressing Notre Dame and finding ways to get Notre Dame to join. If they can get Notre Dame, of course they're going to have to add another couple teams from somewhere. There's a lot of areas they can go. Well, not a lot, but there's some. There's some Texas schools. There's the West Coast schools. The Texas schools make more sense to me. I mean, there's Houston. You can try to get from the Big 12. There's SMU. obviously you can try to get. There's a lot of things that you can do. I just don't know.
I think I think the ACC has basically built a wall, and the Barbarians are at the gate. I think
Hmm.
the only way the ACC can survive is if it gets Notre Dame as a football, and to bring the football
Yeah.
with them. It doesn't it doesn't
Yep.
make any it doesn't make any sense, like you really said earlier. Cal and Stanford, no. Yes, they're great schools. Don't get me
Hmm.
wrong, academically great, but they don't bring the dollars. They don't bring the eyeballs. Good luck trying to get any
Yeah.
of the
There's a
Texas
reason they
teams.
haven't been picked up already.
Exactly, and the cupboard's getting pretty bare in Texas right now because if you're Houston and
Hmm.
you just joined the Big 12 and you're getting more TV money than than you would if you would join the ACC, and the competition is better, and you might just make it, into the 12-team playoff. Why would you leave? There's no reason for them to leave,
Yeah.
and on top of that, the and granted that logistics has gone out the window. I know, but with a lot of these teams in the Big 12 being pretty close regionally, um, it's not that big of a deal for Houston to go to TCU, to Dallas to go play TCU, as it is for Cal to go to Duke and play. Or
Hmm.
and the thing about it is, like, and the Big Ten has just said, screw this, we just want the money, which is why UCLA and USC, get ready for that Purdue UCLA matchup in West
Yeah.
Lafayette. So um, the ACC has painted itself in a corner, and unless they get Notre Dame to bring football with it, I think the clock is ticking. I think within the next 2-3 years, Florida State and Clemson probably will um, leave. And if they leave and Notre
Yeah.
Dame is not there, the ACC will. You might as well just make yourself into the Big East because it's just going to be a basketball school now.
I don't know. I don't know. I don't think Clemson and Florida State has as much leverage as they think that they do. I really don't. I think that the Virginia, North Carolina options brings more to the table. And I don't know. We can talk about, look, I think we've just really scratched the surface, but I think this is kind of like a good place to wrap up for tonight because I know you've got things to do for tomorrow. And we knew going into this that we were going to have to like talk more and more. So let's let's wrap up for tonight because I mean I really feel like we've just done an intro for this whole conversation, but we can get
We've
back
done
to it
a
and continue
snowflake
it.
on top of a glacier. Basically, is what we've done.
Exactly, exactly. So with that said, man, I'm not going to hold you up. I know you're
Oh, you're
tired
fine.
and that you've been working all day,
It's
but
all good.
I want to thank
Always a pleasure.
everybody for listening. By any means, especially with this topic, if you've got comments or questions or things that you want to know or things that you want to talk about as we continue to talk about this topic, college football isn't everybody's favorite topic, but it's one of ours, so we're going to keep talking about it. But
Yeah,
give us a like. Thank you for listening, and
we'll, we'll
we'll
try
see you
better next
next
time. I
time.
promise. Good night,
Yep.
everybody.